Thank you, and welcome to the U.S. Forest Service Urban Forest Connections webinar series. I am Eric Keeler. I'm the Science Delivery and Technology Specialist with the U.S. Forest Service located in Athens, Georgia, and I'll moderate today's webinar for you today. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, information about the series can be found on our website. And this includes upcoming webinars, recordings of past webinars, and related resources. You can also contact us through our website with questions, comments, and especially suggestions for future topics. We want to keep this relevant for you, so we'd love to hear from you if you could provide us with some feedback. So today we'll be exploring trees and stormwater infrastructure. And we have Andrew Tirpak and Lyn Rutherford with us today to share some of their experiences and research in this topic. I did want to mention that if you have any questions during the presentations today, feel free to type them in at any time into the group chat and questions pod down at the bottom of your screen. And we will leave time at the end of these presentations for discussion with both of these speakers. So, you don't have to wait until they're finished to type in your questions anytime. So with that, then let's go ahead and get started with our first presenter. Thank you. Okay, so Andrew Tirpak is a doctoral researcher in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, Tennessee. His graduate research focused on the benefit and health of trees and bioretention practices and their contributions to urban stormwater management. Prior to completing his PhD, Andrew earned a bachelor's degree in environmental engineering from The Ohio State University and worked in the energy industry as an environmental and regulatory advisor in Houston, Texas. So, Andrew, I'm going to go ahead and give it to you.
All right. Thanks so much, Eric, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Like Eric said, I'll be talking to you folks about some of my research that I conducted during my PhD efforts here at the University of Tennessee, which looked at the role of trees and their contributions to bioretention performance in terms of stormwater management. So just a little bit of background. The U.S. EPA recognizes urban stormwater runoff as one of the leading causes of aquatic habitat degradation in cities in the United States and around the world. This is primarily associated and attributed to land use conversion from natural ground cover, as you can see on the left there, to what's more commonly found in cities, which is dominated by large amounts of impervious surfaces like parking lots, rooftops, and roadways. These impervious surfaces have long been connected to changes in downstream hydrology, and their effects essentially reduce or almost eliminate any sort of infiltration into the soils beneath those surfaces. This results in a larger portion of rainfall that is transported through the landscape as surface runoff to the detriment of receiving water bodies. When you couple that with the efficiency that increased volume of runoff gets transported to these aquatic ecosystems through pipe networks and gutters, degraded stream conditions that are known as the urban stream syndrome inevitably occur. Another kind of impact of urban stormwater is that as this increased amount of surface runoff is moving through the urban landscape, it's picking up all of these anthropogenically derived pollutants like sediments, nutrients, and heavy metals, which impact aquatic chemistry and kind of further lead degradations to these ecosystems. Cities around the world and in the United States are increasingly turning toward technologies known as green infrastructure, or low-impact development practices to sustainably manage their urban stormwater runoff. And as we kind of talked about before, one particular practice that I'll be focusing on today is the bioretention practice, which is also known as rain gardens or bioinfiltration practices. Though these systems come with different names, they essentially are derived from the same components. Bioretention practice is more or less an excavated area of land that gets backfilled with an engineered, primarily sandy soil media that gets underlain by a layer of drainage rock and then is either topped with turf grass or can also be topped with mulch. And so the idea with these practices is that surface runoff gets diverted into the systems where the runoff temporarily fills the surface storage zone as ponding, and then it quickly, controllably infiltrates into the bioretention media itself, where a number of different treatment processes occur from both a hydrologic and water quality perspective. Particulate matter gets filtered out by the sandy media. Dissolved compounds are absorbed to soils or taken up by plants or bacteria. And then just in terms of the quantity of runoff, runoff can then, as it moves through the practice, either be diverted into underlying soils through exfiltration, taken up and released into the atmosphere by plants or evaporation as evapotranspiration, or in some instances be delivered to an existing storm sewer network through a perforated drainage pipe that can be located at the bottom of the practice. These practices are one of the most popular types of green infrastructure because of the versatility of their design. They can really be designed to fit within a lot of different aspects of the urban environment. I'd showed this slide here, though it doesn't directly relate to my research. One common design alternative for a bioretention practice is what's known as the internal water storage zone, or IWS. And that's just created simply by raising the elevation of the outflow pipe. And that creates a permanently saturated zone of media, which has effects on both enhancing infiltration into the underlying soils and promoting nitrogen removal through denitrification. So just to kind of shift gears a little bit here, unlike the role in bioretention, the benefit and ecosystem services provided by trees in urban areas is well understood and has been studied for a number of years. At the individual level, trees provide both shading and transportive cooling, which promotes healthier, more comfortable urban environments. We also see cleaner air through CO2 uptake and particulate deposition, and trees also have some impacts on urban hydrology, which are another subject of research that we're conducting here at the University of Tennessee. Scaling up further to both the street and city scale, you start to see these benefits accumulate. Trees, stands alongside the urban streets provide energy savings to nearby buildings through shading. They provide a complex habitat for urban wildlife and also protect pedestrians from motorists in the roadway. At the city scale, cities with more prevalent urban canopy tend to see a further reduction of what's known as the urban heat island effect, reduced particulate pollution, cleaner air, and as I mentioned before, subsequent influences on urban hydrology. So though plants have been shown to improve the performance of bioretention practices, many studies that have been conducted on vegetation in these systems have been limited to hardier plant types that were selected based on their ability to survive in the unique and sometimes harsh growing conditions found in bioretention practices. Oftentimes, plants like grasses, shrubs, and sedges get selected because they're able to withstand both sandy soils that have extended periods of drought between rain events and also periods of inundation as the practice receives runoff from the contributing drainage area. In contrast, relatively few studies have looked at the specific role of trees in bioretention practices, and little guidance is out there in terms of physiological aspects or plant function in terms of how stormwater engineers can select tree species for these systems. So our research was intended to not only investigate the role that trees had in bioretention practices and how they can improve their performance both from a hydrologic and water quality perspective, but also how we could optimize the incorporation of trees into these systems and kind of bring in those ecosystem services that have been recognized for urban trees and thus improve the overall environmental impact of the bioretention practice beyond just stormwater management. So the first study that I'll talk about today is a field survey of tree health and trees in bioretention practices throughout the Southeast. And then I'll quickly touch on a study that we did here on the University of Tennessee's campus on 2 suspended pavement systems that were designed to function as subsurface bioretention practices. So in the first study, the study of tree health and bioretention practices, we conducted this field assessment in the summer of 2015. We worked with city stormwater officials from 5 different cities across Tennessee and North Carolina and identified 38 bioretention practices that were known to have trees growing in them. In total, we saw just under 100 trees, and 6 species in particular accounted for about 3/4 of the total number of trees that we saw. So we chose to focus the first part of our assessment on those most popular species, but then use data from all species in the second part of our assessment. So the first thing that we needed to determine was how could we quantify tree health. And we did that using condition of the crown as an indicator of the overall health of the tree. Tree crowns convert solar radiation into the photosynthase that's required for tree growth, repair, and maintenance, and thus are the net source of primary production for the tree. So their dimensions and fullness then can be general indicators of the overall health of the tree. So while we were out in the field visiting all of these bioretention practices in trees, we took a number of measurements and observations of the various canopies, some of which are shown here. And then we lumped that into these 2 equations here, which come up with 3-dimensional estimates of the crown volume and crown surface area. And this is originally methodology published by Zarnock et al. And later adopted by the U.S. Forest Service. So the idea with this method is that trees with larger crown volumes or larger crown surface areas are going to be in a healthier state of growth and be growing in at a more rapid rate than similar trees that might have portions of the crown missing or patchy areas of the crown that might not be providing as much in terms of the net primary production for the tree. So in general, in terms of our metrics, larger composite crown indicator values, which would be the crown volume or surface area, indicate increased state of tree health. So our first research question for the study was how did the health of the bioretention trees that we observed compare to other similar urban trees? And in order to do that, we had to reference data for similar tree species throughout the Southeast that were just growing in a typical urban environment that wasn't a bioretention practice. And so we were able to reference data collected from iTree eco inventories that were previously conducted across the Southeast by the City of Atlanta, NC State University, and Georgia Tech University. We then filtered those data sets down to the more popular trees that we saw in the bioretention practices, as well as the size of the trees that we saw and the open growing conditions that we saw in the field. And that left us with a data set of about 1,000 trees to reference our data against, which we refer to as the non-bioretention trees. So once we had that data in hand, we calculated the composite crown volume and surface area as we did with the bioretention trees. And here's kind of some of our results. So again, just keeping in mind that with this methodology, larger crown volumes relative to the size of the tree are going to indicate that the tree is in a healthier state than a similar tree with lower crown volumes. And so the 6 species that were most popular that we investigated in this portion of the study, you can see that the first 5, working from the left, red maple, river birch, redbud, lacebark elm, and pin oak, all had significantly lower crown volumes when they were growing in a bioretention setting compared to similar trees of the same species that were growing in a non-bioretention setting. Conversely, bald cypress there on the right was significantly higher, had significantly higher crown volumes growing in the bioretention environment compared to similar bald cypress trees that were growing in a non-bioretention setting. And though I don't show it here, I just want to point out that the similar plot that was made for the crown surface area followed the same trends for all 6 species shown here. So we saw a lot of similarities between both crown volume and surface area, which was promising. So this indicated to us that many of the species that we saw were actually less healthy or doing less well off in bioretention compared to others. And we hypothesized that this was due to some incompatibility with the species-specific growing preferences for things like soil moisture and texture, et cetera. And as I kind of mentioned before, the bioretention environment is like a relatively harsh growing condition. And so shown here, you can kind of infer that the conditions that we would expect to find in a bioretention practice, which would be very dry soils and also temporary periods of inundation, would be outside some of the more narrow ranges, like for the red maple, for example, or may have been too wet or too dry for example, for the lace bark elm. So that kind of is what we inferred may have been influential on the health of those species. Similarly, we also just consulted the natural growing preferences for the other species, and you can see here that the top three kind of fall in line with the first two that I mentioned. For example, eastern redbuds aren't found in sandy soils. However, that's the primary component of bioretention media, so you can see kind of some disagreements there. Conversely to all of this, only the bald cypress appeared to be doing better off in bioretention, and it's been published in literature that their best growth has been in moist, fine sandy loam soils without the presence of competition, which is very similar to the conditions that we would expect to find in a bioretention practice. So I'll quickly move into the second part of our study, which was the identification of particular design parameters that were most influential to tree health. And so when we were out in the field, we also collected a number of samples of the bioretention media, which was analyzed for soil chemistry and composition, as well as we took different measurements and observations of various aspects of the design of the particular bioretention practice. And we hypothesized that a number of these may have some competing or even coordinating influences on the overall health of the tree. And so in order to answer this question, we fed these parameters into decision tree-based machine learning models called random forests, which were used to predict the influence of each of these variables on the overall health of the tree, essentially predicting the composite crown volume and surface area of each tree. So the results of those models, after some variable elimination of the less influential variables, we found a particular subset of variables listed there in the middle column relating to a number of different aspects of tree health were most influential to the trees in bioretention. So we kind of categorized these broadly into particular variables that were tied to media composition, media chemistry, as well as the ultimate species selection and planting location for the tree within the practice itself. And so I won't take too much time to read through any of these comments, but you can see how each one of these, the various predictor variables there in the middle column, could influence the health of the tree. And therefore, in our conclusions, we recommend to folks that those high importance parameters be prioritized and assessed prior to selecting a tree for a bioretention practice, to essentially give the tree the best chance to grow well and succeed throughout the lifetime of the bioretention practice. Next, I'll move into another study that we did here at the University of Tennessee, looking at suspended pavement systems designed to function as subsurface bioretention practices. As I've kind of touched on already, trees provide a number of benefits to the urban environment. However, many aspects of urban soils present challenges to tree growth and survival in cities. Urban soils have been shown to be oftentimes highly compacted, have low levels of porosity, low nutrient levels, or even toxic compounds, and can be poorly aerated. So recently, suspended pavement systems have begun to be used to provide a healthier environment for tree roots in the subsurface. And essentially, these systems are designed to transmit the load from vehicles, pavement, and pedestrians down through the subsurface to a compacted subbase, while providing an uncompacted matrix of soil to tree roots, which is intended to increase their access to air and water in the soil, and thus the overall health of the tree. So traditionally, these systems would be backfilled with a more typical growing media. However, in our applications, these systems were backfilled with that engineered sandy bioretention media mixture, which again is intended to give us more opportunities to manage stormwater, even in the ultra-urban landscapes where land might be less available. And so up until this study, only one study had been done on suspended pavement systems in this application in the past. in Wilmington, North Carolina. However, the authors found that the systems were highly effective at managing stormwater and saw peak flow reductions and significant pollutant removal. So as I mentioned before, we had 2 of these systems that were installed on the campus of the University of Tennessee. The systems were located about 100 meters apart and were very similar in terms of their design size as well as their contributing drainage areas. Here's just kind of an image from the surveyed drainage area for the north site. You can see the practice down there on the lower right-hand part of the screen, and the contributing drainage area shaded in blue is a completely impervious portion of a small 2-lane road that drains into the practice. Next is a cross-section of the components of the south site. So we have the north site on the previous image, and this is here's the south site. You can see the suspended pavement system components there in black. They're a system of decks and frames that transmit the load vertically from the surface down to that gravel subbase there, shown in gray on the bottom of the screen. That bioretention media then gets backfilled into the practice, shown in brown. And then in both systems, we had a series of perforated pipes that were installed throughout. The idea was that runoff that got delivered from the drainage area was routed in through a series of perforated pipes located at the top of the bioretention media, which were intended to distribute the runoff throughout the surface of the practice. And then at the south site, we also had a perforated a perforated underdrain pipe, which collected water that had already passed through the media and transported it out to the back of the practice for sampling. Just another kind of conceptual view of the practice. You can see the relative location of the practice relative to the surface of the road there. Just because of construction constraints, we had to top our systems with topsoil and turf grass. Otherwise, you would commonly see these be installed directly underneath pavements. Here's just some photos of the site going in. You can see the photo on the left. We've got the series of suspended pavement system frames laid out on the bottom of that, the excavated pit there, as well as the perforated underdrain pipe going in. And then we've begun to backfill the system with the bioretention media there on the right, with about a 4-inch layer of, a 4-inch gap between the top of the bioretention media and the deck of the suspended pavement practice, which was designed to provide some temporary storage of runoff. Here we just got some photos of the sites once completed. The grass looks a little less patchy these days, thankfully. We've got some monitoring equipment there on the right, which was used to monitor both inflows as well as drainage and overflows from the south site. So just to quickly touch on the hydrologic results, the practices were monitored for a period of 27 months. During that time, we saw just under 150 storm events that were collected from the systems. And the results that we found from a hydrologic standpoint were really promising. We had the majority of rainfall get diverted as exfiltration and evapotranspiration from the systems, and a vast majority of the storms were completely captured by both the north and south suspended pavement systems. So one key finding here was that the differences in drainage configuration did not have any significant influence on the hydrologic performance of the suspended pavement systems. We also could conclude that they provided similar level of treatment and performance to a more traditional bioretention practice. However, these results did indicate to us that they may have been slightly oversized, as we had nearly 99% of runoff diverted from the surface as exfiltration from the north site and about 89% at the south site. We also took a water quality approach to the south site, where we analyzed 10 sets of paired samples of influent and effluent runoff that had moved through the practice. Our results here were kind of limited in our ability to draw any conclusions from these, in that the influent concentrations in the runoff generated from the drainage area were really low, and so we almost had irreducible concentrations to a point for many of the dissolved constituents. But we did see a significant reduction in total suspended solids there on that top line, which was a promising finding. And so just to conclude, we did find that suspended pavement systems, when designed to function as bioretention practices, were effective at reducing runoff volumes. However, the limited storage volume that could occur in these systems, which was that 4-inch ponding zone directly underneath the surface of the bioretention media and the top of the deck, may have led to slightly oversized practices. And we also recommended that further research be conducted to improve our understanding of the ability of these systems to remove dissolved pollutants from influent runoff streams. And I'll just quickly acknowledge my co-authors here and hand it back to Eric.